Hey everybody, welcome back, and let's take a look at the wrestling magazines as they appeared on the newsstands in 1983. I am getting your messages, and I am reading them all, and I will be doing a video for 1984 and also 1972, I think the other one was, or 74. I'm just jumping up to 1983 because I felt it was an important year. A lot of things happened in 1983, and I thought it would be good to take a look back and cover what was going on in 83, such as we were looking at the end of two world champions, as Bob Backlund and Harley Race would both lose their titles. We'd be looking at the beginning of Ric Flair taking the throne as NWA World Champion. Shortly around the corner, the dreaded Hulkamania was coming, but he's still far back enough to where he didn't get a chance to destroy 1983. Probably the most biggest thing to happen in 1983 was the birth of Starrcade, and basically it was like the birth of pay-per-view. It would change the entire landscape of how we viewed professional wrestling around the world, and it was all brought to us by the first and the biggest show at that time, Starrcade 83, and really important to give Starrcade the respect that it deserves, being the kickoff of all the pay-per-view type big monthly event shows, or yearly, annual event shows, depending on the company and what they put out. It was all started by Starrcade when it was brought to us for mass consumption, when you either went to the arena and seen it or you didn't, or if you were lucky enough, it was on television, or parts of it was on television, and then it was gone forever. And this would be the beginning of putting it out on VHS tape and video stores, and the video market all stemmed off of giving us professional wrestling on different platforms, all the way up to you get now Blu-ray now from VHS and pay-per-view. All started because of the Starrcade event that took place, and and a few other things. We had the birth of Tiger Mask, which is not big news for America, but it was very big news, and he's still very popular in Japan today, in New Japan Pro Wrestling. But before we get that far ahead, because a lot of things happened towards the end of the year, basically it's business as usual. Starting in January of 1983, wrestling is still territorial and on a smaller scale before it is about to explode. So January 83, we got Superfly Snuka on the cover with Captain Lou, and he had just made his heel, dropped his heel, and has now made his face turn, I should say, and is now battling it out with Captain Lou, Ray Stevens, soon to be Magnificent Morocco, all that in Inside Wrestling, January 1983. The wrestler for January 83, Ivan Putski and Cowboy Bob Orton on the cover. The small box in the far side is Morocco and Tommy Rich. Sports Review's cover for January 83 is a bloody Tommy Rich, Wahoo McDaniel battling it out with Greg Valentine on the far left. Pro Wrestling Illustrated, we've got Ricky Steamboat posing on the cover, and Dory Funk battling it out against Bruiser Brody. Wrestling Review, January 83. It's still got this basic 3 to 4, sometimes 2 bubble layout. What I mean by bubble is, each little square bubble boxed out for their wrestlers. It's no one main feature on the cover that points out anything that's going on. Just trying to squeeze in stories for everybody. I never liked that kind of a layout. This is Madison Square Garden, January 22nd, 1983, and it's got the Intercontinental title match. Don Morocco wins the title for the second time as he faces Pedro Morales, the champion. Also on that night, Backlund defended against John Studd, Superstar Graham Sweet Hansen. Superfly Snuka faced Playboy Buddy Rose. February 1983. '83, we got Superstar Graham returning to the cover of a wrestling magazine. Not since 1978 did we see Superstar on the cover posing like this, only now with the new look, the new gimmick that wasn't very popular with Superstar's fans, who was expected to see him back with the full color. February 1983, Inside Wrestling, we got Dusty Rhodes and Terry Funk on the cover in a barbed wire match. Some of these issues I came from my signed collection. They're just mixed in here, so you'll see a few of these that are autographed. February '83, The Wrestler, Nick Bockwinkel and Backlund versus Superstar in the corner. We got Sports Review '83, Ric Flair versus Harley Race. Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin taking on Dusty Rhodes, and again, Jimmy Snuka in the far corner. Snuka will be on a bunch of these covers in the early '83 time period. Wrestling Scene, of course, we talked about this in another video where I was a kid watching this match. Ray Stevens pile drives Snuka outside the ring and breaks his neck on national television, and the blood was spewing from his head, and somebody at the same time had happened to throw a soda, and it landed behind Stevens over his shoulder, and when he pile drived him, it looked like it was blood all over the floor. We thought Snuka was dead. I mean, what an angle, what a feud, what a build-up that was for Snuka's matches to take on Albano's crew. The Rings Wrestling, once again with Superfly Snuka on the cover and Adrian Adonis on the bottom. And Madison Square Garden for February, Valentine's Day Massacre. We got Backlund with the title versus Morocco, and he is his first appearance as the new champion, Intercontinental. We got the Samoans versus Andre and Superfly, Ray Stevens versus Jay Strombo, Pedro versus Buddy Rose, Superstar Graham versus Rocky Johnson. I believe that's one of Superstar's last appearances at the Garden before heading to the NWA. We've got February '83, Superfly on the cover, once again dominating one of the covers and taking on Albano and his crew. This is, I showed this in another magazine. If you're a Snuka fan and you liked him when he just turned face, this has got excellent coverage of Superfly against Morocco in the cage. Also with Stevens and Albano. This is a great issue with full color shots that we didn't get to see full color unless they were on the cover. So that covers up a lot of the matches with Morocco in the cage in color. This is our first look at Tiger Mask on the cover of Gong in 1983, February. And like I said, he made a little run in the WWF. He was the junior heavyweight champion of the WWF. He battled it out with the Dynamite Kid before the British Bulldogs, and is still going strong today in some way, shape, or form in New Japan Pro Wrestling. Of course, it's a different guy. Tiger Mask 4, maybe. I'm not really too sure. March of '83. Superstar Graham and Pedro. Off to the far corner is a throwback article of Terry Funk when he was the NWA World Champ. Roddy Piper and Tommy Rich. This was my first exposure to Roddy Piper. Never really heard of the guy before. This was the first time that I recalled ever seeing him on the cover. And this was my magazine as a kid because it is beat up. This is one of my original issues. I probably should try to upgrade that. March of '83, Ron Bass battling it out with Ric Flair. Once again, Snuka on the cover, and he is talking with his new manager, Buddy Rogers. Wrestling Superstars put out an issue in spring of '83, and once again, Jimmy Superfly Snuka is savaged by Albano. It's a miracle he's still alive. On the bottom, Jack Briscoe and Sergeant Slaughter. This is a autographed photo cover of Bob Backlund on PWI in March. This is also the Wrestler of the Year, most popular Wrestler of the Year, Match of the Year, etc. On these March issues of PWI. I believe this was the first year PWI did this. It was in Wrestler Annual and other issues before. I believe that's the first PWI for the award issues. Also the debut issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated Annual, and this was in the spring of 1983. Basically just recycled stories from PWI's articles in case you had missed an issue. If it was a big story, it would be covered in those quarterly issues. I think in 83 they put out 2 issues, and then it became 4 issues a year after that. The Ring, this is the debut issue of Ringside Wrestling. It's got Hulk Hogan as his Thunderlips role in Rocky III, battling it out with Ivan Putski on the cover. Wrestling Review, March of 83. Just pictures, 4 different guys, you know, the basic nothing stories. This was my program from the Philly Spectrum. My first time I went to the Spectrum in March 19th, and just have the program to that event. Here is the Garden for March of 83, Backlund versus Morocco in the Texas Death Match. Texas Death Match rules. That's the reason you see the Texas map. Also on the card was Snuka and Andre versus Stud and the Samoans. Let's see, Superstar Graham, Jules Strombo. Okay, I guess it wasn't Graham's last match against Rocky. Ray Stevens and Salvatore Bellomo, Backlund, and Morocco was the main event. Wrestling's main event, March 83. Once again, we got Snuka in the far corner destroying Captain Lou Albano in the Garden. Roddy Piper on the cover once again, Wildfire Tommy Rich. Inside Wrestling, once again, Jimmy Snuka on the cover, and Ken Patera and Ivan Koloff get the main cover shot. Here is the first look at Tiger Mask on an American cover in April of 1983 when he was the WWF, I hate saying junior heavyweight champion. I'd rather just hear light heavyweight champion rather than junior. It just doesn't sound right. And Dusty Rhodes in a bull rope around Ernie Ladd's neck. Superstar taking on Backlund for one of their matches at the Garden, and this is the program to that event. I have it actually back here. I didn't realize it was back there. April 1983 with Mil Mascaras on the cover. This is autographed with him with the Mexican Heavyweight Championship belt around his waist. And wouldn't you know, it's Jimmy Snuka on the cover of Wrestling Scene in April. It's also signed by Jimmy, and he's taken on Captain Lou Albano. The Rings Wrestling, Bob Backlund on the cover, and Hulk Hogan on the bottom. Here is the April 25th. I was just trying to see the Garden show. I didn't know what the matches were. I got Backlund versus Koloff, Andre versus Stud, Morocco versus Rocky Johnson, the Samoans versus the Strombo brothers, Superstar Graham versus Jimmy Snuka. Wrestling's main event for April 83, Morocco and Backlund on the cover from their Texas Death Match. Inside Wrestling, May 83, we've got Buzz Sawyer, Bloody Buzz Sawyer, and Bloody Tommy Rich, and this is autographed by Kevin Sullivan. Kevin Sullivan, Satan is my manager. Back when the satanic panic was hitting across America, everyone was a Satanist and everyone was praising the devil. It was so out of hand and ridiculous, but it was a great turn for Sullivan. I mean, really put him as the major heel in Florida with that gimmick. That was really great stuff. May of 83, The Wrestler with the Samoans on the cover. This is autographed by Afa and Sika. And here's a look at Morocco on the cover of Sports Review, May of 83, when he was just getting his belt back the month before of the Intercontinental Championship, and that was signed by Magnificent Morocco. May of 83, Superfly Snuka on the cover of PWI. This is the first issue of Official Wrestling. It's got Hulk Hogan on the cover. Pretty lousy magazine, terrible covers. They're very out of focus covers. Inside the magazine, they went through a lot of territories that weren't really covered. This is where I first learned about Macho Man Savage and the ICW. So they went to places like that other places didn't go to very often. But Official Wrestling was not a good magazine at all. Very cheap, very out of focus photos and stuff like that. Wrestling scenes for May as Flair versus Hacksaw Butch Reed. Wrestling Review on May 83, and I've got it signed by Jerry Lawler and also Scott Casey in the top. And May 1983, Madison Square Garden, and Backlund versus Slaughter, Morocco versus Johnson again, Moolah versus Princess Victoria, Samoan versus Superfly, Dusty Rhodes versus Samoan 2, Ivan Koloff versus Jules Strombo, Leilani Kai, and Susan Starr. May of main event, Paul Orndorff, Ivan Koloff. 1983, the Japanese issue would be the kickoff of the very prestigious world title today, the IWGP. Back in 1983, when it kicked off, it was a trophy title for winning a tournament that they had, a single elimination tournament. And it's still going strong today, and now as a defended world championship in New Japan. And in case you were wondering who won that tournament, it was Hulk Hogan. And here, if you've ever seen this magazine and wasn't sure which belt that was, it's Hulk Hogan's IWGP World Heavyweight Championship Tournament Trophy Belt. I say trophy belt because it wasn't defended. It was defended the following year to the winner of the following year's tournament. So the champion of the year before had gotten a pass. He didn't have to compete in the tournament. He just had to come back and defend the title if he chose to. And at that time, he was in the WWF, and he would defend it against Antonio Inoki the following year. And Inoki, of course, would take the belt from that point. June of 1983, Inside Wrestling. Here is the cover of Stud and Backlund. We just read about the Garden match they had a couple of months prior. Stud and Backlund. And Wrestler, June of 83, Barry Windham on his cover with Ric Flair. Nice shot of Rowdy Roddy Piper in June of 83 on Sports Review. June 83, Pro Wrestling Illustrated, Rick Martel. AWA champ Nick Bockwinkel, and the return of Buddy Rogers on the bottom. And this is what you'd be talking about, Buddy Rogers' match with Jimmy Snuka at the Spectrum. I tried to get tickets for that. I still to this day, see the Green-Eyed Monster when my cousin went and I didn't. And it was like the hottest ticket in town. And Buddy Rogers coming out of retirement to face Ray the Crippler Stevens and Lou Albano at the Philly Spectrum. I'm shocked it wasn't at the Garden. Why Philly got it, I'll never know, but I would have loved to have been there for that. It's one thing my cousin throws in my... He's also a wrestling magazine collector, and he's close to what I have. He has all the 80s and 70s issues, not 60s and 50s, but he's always trying to one-up me. I'm always trying to one-up him, and that's one thing he'll always have on me. Wrestling Review, June 83. And Wrestling World, I'm sorry I shortchanged you guys. I don't have my Wrestling World issues here. And I didn't realize that until I pulled all these out. And I was like, well, I'm not going to not do the video because my Wrestling World's not here. I only have the Wrestling World issues that I have autographed here, and they're at my other house. But I will be making a Wrestling World video. I made it up until 1980. I have from 62 to 80 filmed. I just don't have from 80 up. I only have from 80 to 89 anyway, but I will make a video for those Wrestling Worlds. I know a lot of you guys have asked for it too, and I will get to it. This is the wrestling program from the Garden, the new format. This is when Vince McMahon took over the publication, no longer subbed it out to the Wrestling News and Norman Keitzer, and this is his new style, which was more of a magazine just for the WWF, and good photos, good color photos, but later on it just went to crap. And I stopped buying the magazines. I'm sorry, the programs at that point. I have all the Garden programs from 76 to 83 complete for, each and every month. And I bought this issue, and I have maybe 2 others, and that was it. I didn't like the new layout when McMahon took it over. June of 83, the main event, great shot of Mil Mascaras. Here's somebody who just kind of like disappeared from the magazine covers, who was dominant in the 60s and 70s. He just kind of fell off the face of the earth towards the mid-80s. You really didn't hear much about Mil at all anymore. It's a great shot. One of the last shots we see of him too. Not very often would he appear on too many more covers. I mean, he'd be on a couple in 83, 84, but after that, it was hard to see him. Everything was, pretty much Hulk Hogan at that point. July 83, Inside Wrestling, Butch Reed and Ivan Koloff, and what was said to be the biggest event in the Crockett territory. If any of our Crockett fans or in the Carolinas down there at this point can probably clarify it better. The Steamboat and Youngblood winning the tag titles, and Slaughter and Cronoodle, the cage match in Greensboro, was a huge event, and I heard it sold out, and people came from far and wide to get in and couldn't. And this was what sparked the brainchild for the Starrcade event. That's all I can remember hearing about it. Anyone cares to chime in about that, please fill us in on the comments. I would like to hear it myself. But I heard that this was like the event that started it, made Starrcade 83 a possibility. Wrestler, July 83, Bruiser Brody and Ric Flair. Jimmy Valiant and Humperdinck on the cover. And sorry to break the bad, I think this is the one. I believe this is the last issue with the Apartment Girls on it. Don't quote me. I might be wrong. For all the Apartment fans. Wrestling Superstars, Summer of 83, and it's got a collage of Backlund and all his opponents throughout the years. July 83, Ric Flair and Tommy Rich. I've always liked this cover. I always thought it was a great looking cover. One of the few covers from here on out you'll see PWI with an actual wrestling match. Usually they save their covers for a posed cover, which I disliked pretty much, but I always liked that cover. Another issue of Official Wrestling, and this has the coverage of Snuka and Rogers at the Spectrum. It's also introducing Macho Man Savage for the first time on a cover of a magazine. Ringside Wrestling, July 83, Ricky Steamboat on the cover, and this is a match he did as a tag team. It was in Japan. Buzz Sawyer, Tommy Rich on the cover, July, of Wrestling Scene. The Rings Wrestling with another fantastic cover. Wrestling Review with, July 83, Wrestling's Main Event. It's also got Butch Reed and Flair from the same match that they had on the cover of the Wrestling Scene. This is the first issue of, it was called Monthly Pro Wrestling in Japan, the biggest, longest running wrestling magazine in history. It started in 1955 as a boxing combination magazine. In August of 72, it went to a strictly wrestling magazine each month. And this August 9th, 1983 would be the first weekly issue. Instead of coming out monthly, it came out every week. It was a lot thinner, handful, maybe 30 pages, and it would come out weekly. And this was the very first issue of the weeklies, and it's a sought-after, expensive issue with Tiger Mask on the cover of Pro Wrestling Weekly. Sorry about that. Inside Wrestling, August of 83, Nick Bockwinkel, Jerry Lawler. I remember buying this issue. The Wrestler, August of 83, Ric Flair battling it out with Greg Valentine, also Tully Blanchard in the corner. I remember buying this at a news shop in Midtown, and it was like this dark, dingy, scary looking place from the outside, and even scarier looking on the inside. You first open the door and this old guy sitting there smoking a cigar. The place is covered with smoke. It stunk of like nicotine and cigar smoke. And there's this miserable old prick sitting right at the door, and it's just a long, skinny, narrow building. And it was just nothing but magazines from top to bottom, left and right. It was just one aisle, straight down, left side of you, right side of you. And you name it, if it was a magazine printed, it was there. And I just remember buying this issue there, and it just stuck in my head. It was just like a real 70s, dirty looking place in Midtown. August 83, Sports Review Wrestling, and it's got the Iron Sheik getting ready to get a cowbell through the head by Dusty Rhodes and Dick Murdoch. August 83, Rowdy Roddy of PWI. August 83, Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair on a bloody cover of Wrestling Scene. The Rings Wrestling, yep, another fantastic cover by the Wrestling Review. It's also owned by Wrestling Review, The Rings, also Wrestling News. They're all owned by the same guy, and they're both all putting out the low-budget issues. Wrestling World, I think this is the last Wrestling World that I have in the pile. Like I said, I will get a Wrestling World video out for you guys. August 83, Roddy Piper and Greg Valentine. Coming up to the fall, September 1983 with Zbyszko and Rich. Hulk Hogan on the cover with Nick Bockwinkel in September, The Wrestler. The Von Erich Boys with Father Fritz, September 83 Sports Review. And look who's back on the cover of a wrestling magazine. Bruno Sammartino looking in fantastic shape, back on the cover, listed as the greatest WWF champion of all time. And yep, I got to agree with that. Official Wrestling, Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat on the cover. Ringside Wrestling, Ric Flair and Barry Windham. The Rings, this was September 83, Mr. Wrestling 2, Wrestling Review, The Junkyard Dog. Wrestling's Main Event, Andre on the cover in Japan, and Adrian Adonis capturing the world title, which was Southwest Championship Wrestling's world title down in Houston. Mr. Wrestling 2 and Larry Zbyszko on the cover in October 83, Inside Wrestling. As many of you know, one of my favorite issues of the 80s, Ric Flair and Harley Race battling it out. Race wins the title for the 7th time. I got this autographed by both men. Great looking magazine with the blood, the red background, the black backdrop. Just love the cover. October 83 Sports Review, Rick Martel and Greg Valentine. Final issue for Wrestling Superstars of the year, and it's fall of 83. This actually, let me go back to this. Anyone who's a fan of NWA, Mid-Atlantic, Crockett area, territory wrestling, this has got a great special on World Championship Wrestling, WCW, Georgia Wrestling, all that studio. This has got a great segment in this issue all about Georgia and the Mid-Atlantic wrestling. So if you like that stuff, that's a great issue to pick up. Tommy Rich on one of his last couple covers before he would disappear off the face of the earth in wrestling also. October 83, I believe this is his last full cover by himself. Pro Wrestling Illustrated Annual, and this would be the last issue for 83, as it only put out 2 for that year. I got this autographed by Tony Atlas. It was a super nice guy, by the way. Really, 2 people who stood out as being really friendly. Tony Atlas and, believe it or not, Wendy Rector had to be 2 of the nicest people from wrestling. Roddy Piper was also really friendly and fun. All-Star Wrestling, issue number 1, debut issue, and it's got Ric Flair and Dick Slater. This is autographed by Rick. Wrestling Scene, October 83 with Mosca and Briscoe. The Rings Wrestling with the Chief, Wahoo McDaniel. Wrestling Review, the incredible Hulk Hogan, Butch Reed, and Junkyard Dog, with covering their feud in Mid-South. The debut issue of Wrestling 83 with Hulk Hogan on the cover. This would run to 93 before the name would change to, I think they just added the name Rule Breaker to the magazine. October 83 with Ric Flair and Harley Race, and this is Harley's coverage with him winning the title, and it's also got a poster of Harley with the 10 pounds of gold, his last poster he would have with the belt. November 83, Inside Wrestling, Wahoo and Nick Bockwinkel. Dusty and Harley battled out on The Wrestler, November 83. Blackjack Mulligan, Andre the Giant on the cover of Sports Review, November 83. Our last look at Harley Race as world champion on the cover of a magazine, his first and only cover of PWI, November 1983, autographed 8 times, world champion Harley Race. And it was very sad to see him go to the WWF and do that King crap. Official wrestling, once again, November 83, with the High Flyers, Brunzell and Gagne, as AWA Tag Team Champions. More coverage of the Ric Flair and Harley Race match when Race wins the title in ringside, November 1983. Wrestling Scene, Kabuki and Jimmy Valiant. The Rings Wrestling covering Magnum TA, Buck Rock and Roll Zumhoff, and Mr. Saito. November's Madison Square Garden issue, and this would be Bob Backlund's last title defense as world champion, as we're coming up to a different direction, I should say, for the WWF when pre-Hulkamania was about to take place in January or so. This would be the last look at Backlund in the Garden. It had Backlund versus the Masked Superstar at this show. And the NWA's kickoff to the biggest wrestling show of all time, Starrcade 83. I'm going to take you guys inside the magazine. They call it a program. It's more of like a photo album. It's got a lot of photos. The front cover I have autographed. I have an autograph by Harley and Rick. I'll just show you a couple of pages on the inside so you could just, maybe if you've never seen it, you can see what the inside looks like. It's got just some photos like this. I got Steamboat autograph, this one. Valentine. It's all full color. There's not really any articles. They're just showing photos of wrestlers. I got this autograph by Jimmy Valiant when he was performing as Charlie Brown with the mask. Terry Kibbs. I had Rick sign the page at the bottom inside for Flair for the gold. And Jimmy Valiant signed it as the Boogeyman here. And I've got one other. Was to be Hulk Hogan was supposed to be on the card and rumored to be coming to NWA Crockett, and I got it autographed by Hogan on the inside, which is a pretty rare thing because he's a WWF guy at this point, and just think of the possibilities had he had not went to the WWF and he went to the NWA, he would not be used anywhere near like he was used in the WWF, and wrestling as we knew it could possibly have been different. Kind of wish he did go to the NWA because they wouldn't have put up with that kind of shit. But nevertheless, Starrcade 83 was the kickoff, the biggest event of all time, and thanks to it, we still have pay-per-views now because of it. Finishing off the last issue in November would be the main event. November 1983, Backlund and Ron Bass down in Florida. And December, end of the line. December 83, Harley Race going against Jimmy Valiant. Mil Mascaras wins the AWA World title, but is stolen away from him and given back to Bockwinkel. Vern was great at doing stuff like that. December 83 Sports Review. December 83 PWI. December 83 All-Star Wrestling, Purple Haze, which was Mark Lewin and Blackjack Mulligan. Wrestling Review, December 83. December 83, Barry Windham, Joe LeDuc on the cover. And that is it for the magazines. And a little too early to tell, but Backlund would lose the world title to the Iron Sheik in December. I had gotten this autograph by the Sheik. It's funny, I went and seen the Sheik, right? I was telling the story in one of the comments. And sometimes I like to have my name put on stuff. Sometimes I don't. I guess it just depends on my mood or whatever. So I had these two photos. Actually, Sheik had this photo, and I had brought the WWF photo with me. And he goes, "Do you want me to make it out too?" And I said, "Yeah, make it out to Bill." And so he puts to Mr. Bill on there. I'm like, you got to be fucking kidding me. I wanted to throw up when he wrote Mr. Bill on there. It just infuriated me to no end. I'm like, oh my God. I mean, how can I get this off, you know? So I was like, you know what, here, on this one, just sign your name. Don't put my name on there. I don't want Mr. Bill on there. So here's the Sheik with the World Championship. Sheik, I thought was, he's a great wrestler, or a real legit wrestler. Great to take the throne. Last real, champion that was a legit, background and tough. I thought he would have, been a perfect champ. We knew it wouldn't last long. We knew he would, this was basically a babyface town in the Northeast, and in the beginning, it looked like it would be great because Backlund was so humdrum and boring and whatnot. Backlund catches a lot of shit. I know he's not the most, exciting, but he was a good champion. I have to give the guy somewhat, credit. I'd rather have the Sheik lasted a longer run than he did, but nevertheless, it's one thing you can't take away from him. He was the WWF champion. Backlund, if I could say Backlund for a minute, and look at him and look what he went to and where he went. He went to the AWA afterwards, and he wrestled. I got to meet him when he wrestled in Atlantic City at the Tropicana for an AWA Pro Wrestling USA TV taping. I was just a kid, maybe 16 or 17. Super nice guy, friendly to everybody, signed everyone's autograph, took pictures with everybody. It gave me a different appreciation of the guy. Once you got to meet him and see how nice he was and how friendly he was, and honestly, how heartbroken he was. You could clearly tell, because I remember my cousin saying to him, "Bob, you're still a champ to us." Now, here's me and my cousin hating Backlund's guts, watching him on TV saying this is the most boring wrestling ever. We can't stand the guy. And here we are, being so nice to the dude when we actually meet him. And he was just being so appreciative and kind back to us. You couldn't help but to like the guy. He catches a lot of shit, and understandably so. He was a very boring guy to talk and listen to on the mic. He had some battles. Anybody I would suggest who hates him and thinks he's terrible, go back and watch him with a fresh set of eyes. And look at some of the matches that he went up with Adrian Adonis, with Greg Valentine, with Ken Patera in like 81, 82, 80 even. In 80, he battled Dusty Rhodes in Japan. He battled Antonio Inoki several times, Dragon Fujinami. There were some great matches. Angelo Mosca in 81, Stan Hansen. He battled a couple of times, even in the cage. He battled Snuka in the cage in 82. Blackjack Mulligan, Morocco several times that you've seen on some of the programs. He wrestled Ric Flair. He wrestled Nick Bockwinkel for the AWA belt. He wrestled Harley Race 2 times. His first title defense was against Harley Race in 78. The guy had big shoes to fill coming into Bruno's home. And I think the guy, looking back on it, he did a really good job. I mean, the guy was tough. He was there every month. He respected the sport of professional wrestling. He respected the fans. He was a role model. He cared about the kids. He cared about kids wrestling, and he pushed for kids programming. He was always there for benefits and charities. He was a decent dude. And then towards the end, he even made a run for the UWF world title in Japan. Anyone who doesn't know what the UWF is, it's a super stiff. It's a shoot, but not. They do a lot of contact. If you see this match, Backlund versus Nahibu Takada, the champion, Backlund's face was mangled. His mouth was bloodied. His nose was smashed. His nose was swollen. He took his beating in this match, and that's how it was there. And he gave it right back, too. And this guy's face was bloodied, and it was black-eyed and swollen. They took their hits. I had a lot of respect for Backlund after some of his UWF matches. Because there were no joke there. Yeah, it was a predetermined, sure, but you got your ass beat in the process. And I give Backlund a lot of credit, because Hogan wasn't going to do shit like that. Hogan wasn't going to compete on a level like those guys did in the UWF. So I'm not trying to change anybody's mind. I'm not trying to say Backlund was great, but Backlund was a lot better than me as a kid would have given credit to. And I have, a lot more respect for Backlund looking back at him now. All right, I'm going to shut the fuck up. All right, guys, I will see you on the next. I hope you enjoyed a look back at 1983.